Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a place at the edge of the galaxy where the stars themselves look wrong. Not wrong in the way that, say, a death-world sun bakes the ground into cracked terracotta and poisons the air with radiation. Not wrong in the way a warp-tainted system pulses with sickly purple light and whispers to passing navigators in frequencies that make them weep. No. The stars at the rim of the Milky Way look wrong in a much older, quieter, and somehow far more unsettling way. They look wrong the way a photograph of a loved one looks wrong when you find it in an abandoned house that has sat empty for 100 years. They are familiar, they are cold, and everything that should have been living around them is gone. Welcome to the Halo Stars. This is the name the Imperium of Man gives to the thin halo of ancient stellar formations that rings the outermost edge of the galaxy, circling the Milky Way, the way a crown of tarnished iron might circle the head of something long dead. They stretch for approximately 200,000 light-years around the circumference of the galaxy. 200,000 light-years of old, cold stars, dispersed so thinly across that vast distance that they cluster only occasionally, sitting in quiet, dim groups, like the embers of a fire that went out so long ago, nobody remembers what was burning. Beyond them is nothing, just the intergalactic void, stretching away into a darkness so complete and so vast that even the concept of distance loses its meaning. Every expedition the Imperium has ever sent into the deepest reaches of the Halo Stars has never come back. Not one, not a single ship, not a single distress signal, not a single astropathic scream that made it all the way back to civilized space. Just silence. The specific, irreversible silence of things that no longer exist. Tonight, we are going to spend some time sitting with that silence. We are going to look at what we actually know about the Halo Stars, the different regions that make up this vast and desolate frontier, the things that live there, the things that have come out of there, and the reasons that every rational navigator, every battle-hardened general, and even the most greed-blinded rogue trader eventually reaches the same quiet, cold conclusion, that the Halo Stars are not a place you go to find glory. They are a place you go to disappear. So settle in. Let the darkness gather a little around the edges, and let's talk about the edge of everything. There is something worth pausing on before we begin in earnest, because it sets the tone for everything that follows. In the Warhammer 40,000 setting, the galaxy is extraordinarily dangerous by default. The Orc menace covers hundreds of worlds across every segmentum, a species of violent beings who exist to fight and multiply and consume. The forces of chaos gnaw at the edges of every stable system, leaking through the warp, corrupting from within, driving entire populations into heresy and rebellion over the course of generations. Necron tomb worlds wake with cold regularity, ancient metal legions rising from their 65 million year sleep to reclaim territory that humanity has had the audacity to colonize. The Tyranids drift through space in numbers that defy comprehension, consuming every biosphere they encounter and leaving behind worlds stripped so clean that even the bacteria are gone. The Eldar play their long, cold political games with human lives as the smallest denomination of the currency they spend, without hesitation. This is normal. This is the average level of threat in the 41st millennium. This is what every Imperial commander goes to sleep knowing waits for them in the morning. And then there are the Halo Stars, which sit beyond all of that, beyond the chaos, beyond the Xenos empires, beyond the waking Necrons. It's beyond everything that the Imperium has names and doctrines and battle plans for, and which produce a quality of silence that says, plainly to anyone with the sensitivity to hear it, that naming and doctrine and battle plans are not going to be sufficient here. There are regions of the galaxy that are dangerous. And then there is the Halo Stars, which is something categorically different. Something old enough that dangerous is not quite the right word for it. Something that doesn't particularly care whether you know it's there or not, because it has been here since before caring was something anything in this galaxy did. Before we dive into the specific geography, the specific threats, the specific histories of catastrophe and silence that define this region, I want you to carry one image with you through the whole discussion. The image of a very old lighthouse. Not the warm, helpful lighthouses that sailors use to navigate coastal waters. The opposite. A lighthouse that went dark 10,000 years ago, whose keeper died without successors, whose lamp has been cold for so long that the mechanism that turned it is rusted into place and couldn't be restarted if anyone tried. And along the rocky shore below this dead lighthouse, in the cold water, in the dark, in the fog, ships are still going where they shouldn't, still following the absence of the light into waters that are not safe, still not coming back. And on the cliff above, cut into the stone by hands that have been dust for longer than anyone can calculate, there are warnings. In languages no one alive speaks anymore, about things that do not have names in the languages that replaced them. That is the halo stars, a place full of warnings in languages we cannot read, about things we cannot name, at the edge of a darkness we cannot cross. The shape of the abyss. To understand why the halo stars are what they are, you need to start with a picture of the galaxy itself, because the geography here matters enormously. Imagine the Milky Way as a great flat disk, a city of hundreds of billions of stars, stretching out over roughly 100,000 light years from one edge to another, thickest at the center, where a supermassive black hole broods at the heart of everything, and thinning out as you move toward the rim. The Imperium of man occupies a large swathe of this disk, centered approximately on the star system that contains Holy Terra, the Emperor's throne world. Spread across 5 great segmentums, the Imperium claims hundreds of thousands of worlds, and even that enormous domain only covers perhaps a third of the galaxy's habitable volume, with entire regions still unexplored, contested, or simply unreachable. But here is the thing that most maps of the Imperium don't quite convey. The Milky Way is not just a flat disk. Around the edges of that disk, where the density of stars starts to thin dramatically, there is a sort of halo, a sparse sphere of extremely old stellar bodies that surrounds the galaxy above and below its flat plane, as well as out past its rim. These are what astronomers in the real world call halo stars, and Games Workshop took that concept and used it as the foundation for one of the most atmospheric and unsettling regions in all of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. In the lore, these halo stars are considered the oldest stars in the entire galaxy. We are talking about stellar objects that are so ancient, they predate most of what makes the galaxy as we understand it. While the dense spiral arms of the Milky Way were still forming, while gas clouds were only beginning to collapse into new solar nurseries, these stars were already old, already burning through their hydrogen, already beginning, in some cases, to cool and dim into the cold husks that Imperial explorers would one day find circling them. Dead worlds, orbiting dying suns, orbiting corpse stars that burned their brightest millions upon millions of years ago. The circumference of the halo stars is approximately 200,000 light years. Hold that number in your mind for a moment. The diameter of the Milky Way from arm to arm is maybe 100,000 light years. The halo stars wrap all the way around that and then double it. They trace the entire circumference of the galaxy like the outer edge of a coin, and they do so in a thin, dispersed band that at points may also be intermixed with the vast shroud of dark matter that extends several 100,000 light years beyond the visible disk of the galaxy itself. Nobody really knows what is out there in the far dark matter halo. The dark matter shroud is, by its very nature, invisible. It doesn't emit light. It doesn't interact with the warp in any way that navigators or astropaths can sense or interpret. It is simply there, an invisible mass of something that warps gravity in ways that hold the galaxy together. It is stretching away into a darkness that swallows everything that enters it. The halo stars, already at the absolute rim of explored space, sit on the edge of this shroud. and anything that travels far enough past those last cold suns passes into a darkness where even the warp, that chaotic and terrifying mirror dimension that underlies reality and makes faster-than-light travel possible, falls silent. Now, the halo stars are not uniformly distributed around the galaxy. Their relationship to the various segmentums of the Imperium shifts depending on where you are looking from. In the segmentum obscurus, in the galactic northwest, the halo stars are partially accessible through a narrow region known as the Coronus Expanse, which lies beyond the Calixis sector and is accessed through a treacherous warp passage called the Maw, or the Coronus Passage. This is, by galactic standards, one of the better explored corners of the halo stars, which should tell you something about how thoroughly untouched the rest of it is, because the Coronus Expanse is a place where rogue traders go to disappear, where Xenos empires of unknown origin sit waiting in the dark, and where the rifts of Hecaton swallow fleets whole. In the galactic west, the segmentum Pacificus borders a region simply called the Halo Zone, which is the specific section of halo stars that the greatest imperial general of the 41st millennium, Lord Commander Solar Macccarius himself, reached at the height of his legendary crusade and then refused to enter. The fact that even Macccarius turned back from the Halo Zone tells you something that no academic description ever could. In the northeast, or beyond the eastern fringe of the segmentum ultima, lies a region called the Ghoul stars. This is probably the most famous and most extensively discussed part of the halo stars, and for good reason. The Ghoul stars are a named, partially described nightmare, a sub-region of the halo with its own terrible reputation, its own specific horrors, and its own dedicated Space Marine chapter, whose entire existence is devoted to making sure the things in there never come out in force again. Throughout all of these regions, certain qualities persist, certain cold, constant facts about the halo stars that make them not just dangerous, but uniquely, specifically unsurvivable in ways that are distinct from the other lethal places in the 40,000 galaxy. The first is simple stellar physics. These stars are old, genuinely, cosmically old, yet in a way that shapes the worlds around them. Old stars burn dimmer and cooler than young ones. Their light is redder, more diffuse, less energetic. The worlds that orbit them, if they circle them at all, receive less heat and less ultraviolet radiation. In many cases, the stars have already evolved past their main sequence phase entirely, swelling into red giants that scorched their inner planets, or cooling into white dwarfs and red dwarfs that barely warm the rocks around them. The image this creates, which the lore captures beautifully, is of worlds orbiting under cold, rust-colored light that barely deserves the name. Worlds that are dim, cold, and old. Worlds that feel like photographs of other worlds taken in an era so far past that whatever civilization might have arisen there has had eons to rise, flourish, collapse, decay, and be forgotten. There is also a second quality, subtler and more dangerous, which we will spend a great deal of time on. The halo stars lie almost entirely beyond the range of the Astronomicon, and that single fact, more than any monster or Xenos threat or warp storm, is why nobody comes back. The darkness without a lighthouse. In the grim dark future of the 41st millennium, humanity moves between the stars by entering a parallel dimension called the warp, or the Imperium, or a dozen other names that range from reverent to terrified. The warp is a mirror of real space, where physical distance is compressed and traversed in a fraction of the time it would take in normal space. But it is also an ocean of roiling psychic energy, driven by the emotions of every sentient mind in the galaxy, and given direction and malign purpose by the immensely powerful entities called Chaos Gods, who have coalesced from that psychic ocean over eons. The warp is a shortcut. It is also a place that will kill you in ways that defy description if you are not very careful, and sometimes even when you are. The key to surviving warp travel is the navigator. Navigators are a human genetic mutation, a controlled and cultivated one that the Imperium has maintained for tens of thousands of years. They are mutants with a third eye, the warp eye, which allows them to look into the immaterium while safely encased in a shielded chamber on the ship and perceive the currents and eddies of that dimension. More importantly, they can perceive the Astronomicon. The Astronomicon is a psychic beacon. It broadcasts from Holy Terra, powered by the psychic sacrifice of thousands of specially trained psychers who sit in enormous chambers on Terra and essentially pour their minds into maintaining this signal, burning through their life force in the process. The beacon is amplified and directed by the Emperor himself, sitting on the golden throne in his state of neither living nor dead preservation, and it projects a psychic lighthouse across the entire galaxy. The signal is immensely powerful at close range, and navigators near the galactic core or in the central regions of the Imperium can sense it easily, a fixed point in the howling chaos of the warp by which they can orient themselves and chart a safe course. That signal does not reach everywhere equally. At roughly 50,000 light-years from Terra, the signal begins to fade, and not catastrophically at first. Not with any dramatic announcement. It just gets quieter, the way a radio station fades as you drive away from a city, until the static starts to drown out the music. And somewhere around the outer edge of the segmentums, somewhere in the transitional zone between the core Imperium and the halo stars, the signal fades to the point where a navigator standing at the helm of a vessel about to enter the warp can no longer sense it at all. This is not a technical problem that can be solved with better equipment. It is not a gap that can be bridged with a relay station or an auxiliary beacon. The Astronomicon is a psychic signal, and psychic signals do not broadcast indefinitely. They fade. And in the halo stars, they fade entirely. What this means practically for a navigator is something close to a pilot being asked to fly a plane through a hurricane while blindfolded, and then land it on a runway they cannot see, feel, or detect in any way. The warp is not a safe, stable environment in the best of circumstances. It shifts and churns constantly. Time flows differently in it than it does in real space, sometimes faster and sometimes slower, which means a journey that takes weeks in real space might take years inside the warp, or a journey that takes months of subjective experience might deliver you somewhere years after you departed. This temporal distortion is manageable when you have the Astronomicon to lock onto, because the signal gives you a stable reference point that allows you to anchor your perception and maintain some control over where and when in real space you will emerge. Without it, you are lost in the most complete and literal sense of that word. Consider what that actually means in practical operational terms. An Imperial expedition fleet that enters the warp in the halo stars, even one crewed by the most experienced navigators available, is making a journey without maps, without compass, without GPS, without any of the navigational technology that 21st century humans take so completely for granted that we would struggle to function without it. We would be, in that situation, lost. We would not know where we were going. We would not know when we had arrived. We would not know how to turn around. Imperial navigators are better at this than we would be, trained for it, biologically adapted for it, culturally formed around the challenges of warp travel in a way that makes them extraordinarily capable within the bounds of what is possible. But those bounds exist. And in the halo stars, those bounds are tested to their absolute limit and then pushed past it. The law makes clear that navigators who attempt to guide vessels through warp space, beyond the range of the Astronomicon, are essentially navigating by feel and instinct in an environment that is actively hostile to both. Some manage it, for short hops, with extremely experienced personnel and favorable warp conditions. Some manage it by following the faintest ghost of the signal, using it as a smear of distant light on the horizon of their perception, rather than a clear beacon. But the deeper into the halo stars you go, the more that faint ghost fades, until there is nothing. Just the warp. just the howling dark, full of things that would very much like to eat your mind. It is worth understanding, too, what happens to ships in the warp that lose navigational coherence. In the best case, they emerge in real space at the wrong time and the wrong place, disoriented, their crew aged by the differential effects of warp travel, their supplies depleted by a journey that lasted longer than planned. In worse cases, they drift in the warp indefinitely, drawn by currents they cannot counter into regions of the Imperium that no living thing should reach. In the worst cases, they attract the attention of the entities that exist in the warp, the demons and predators and malicious intelligences that roam the psychic ocean, which treat unguided ships as food. Not metaphorically, actually as food, consuming the psychic energy of the crew, driving them to madness, twisting the vessel itself into something that bears only a distant relationship to what it was when it left port. Ships lost in the warp sometimes resurface. Sometimes, centuries after they disappeared, a vessel that was written off as a casualty of the deep void drifts back into real space, trailing temporal anomalies and populated by crew members who aged decades in what felt like weeks, or who appear not to have aged at all, despite the passage of generations. These are called space hulks, and they are among the more comprehensible outcomes for ships lost in the halo stars, because at least space hulks come back. The ships that go into the halo stars and do not come back do not even leave that much. And then there are the astropaths. Astropaths are psychic communicators, human psychers who have undergone a binding ritual that links their minds to the Emperor's psychic presence and allows them to send and receive messages across vast distances of space, bypassing normal communication entirely. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica maintains a network of astropaths across the entire Imperium, and it is through this network that the vast bureaucratic machinery of humanity's galactic empire manages to function at all, because without some form of faster-than-light communication, an empire spanning the width of a galaxy would be ungovernable. Astropaths, too, depend on proximity to the Emperor's psychic presence, and in the halo stars, that presence fades to nothing. An astropathic message sent from the depths of the halo stars would need to bridge an unthinkable distance back to inhabited space, projecting through the warp with no relay stations, no psychic landmarks, and diminishing power the entire way. The lore notes that astropaths operating in the halo stars are virtually beyond the range of psychic communication, which in practice means that even if an expedition encountered something terrible out there, even if they found what was hunting them and had time to form a coherent warning, that warning would dissolve in the psychic noise of the warp long before it reached anyone who could act on it. The isolation this creates is not just physical, it is categorical. An expedition into the deeper halo stars is, from the moment it passes beyond the Astronomican's range, effectively cut off from the rest of humanity in every meaningful sense. No navigation aids, no communications, no rescue if something goes wrong, no way to call for help, no way to tell anyone what you found. And then there is the time dilation problem. Warp travel is already subject to temporal distortion under normal circumstances. The ratio of time experienced inside the warp to time passing in real space is unpredictable and can run anywhere from slightly compacted to wildly expanded. Experienced navigators, with the Astronomican as a reference, can minimize this distortion by choosing stable warp routes and maintaining careful control of their exit points. Without the Astronomican, this control is lost. The lore specifically notes that for the halo zone, yet the time taken to cross a region is greatly increased compared to equivalent space in the core Imperium, and more crucially, the time differential between real space and warp travel is correspondingly increased. This means that an expedition that spends 6 months of subjective time navigating the warp in the halo stars might emerge in real space to find years have passed. Or they might find that they have somehow arrived decades before they left. The warp does not care about causality in the way that living beings do, and without the anchor of the Astronomican, that indifference becomes a weapon. There is one more layer to this that the lore notes quietly, but which deserves to be said plainly. Many of Macccarius's troops, when they learned what waiting in the Halo Zone would mean for warp travel, believed that they would no longer be under the protection of the Emperor, not metaphorically, not as a rhetorical flourish. They genuinely believed that beyond the range of the Astronomicon, they would be sailing without the Emperor's light, and that whatever protection that light offered, whether spiritual or practical, would be withdrawn from them in their moment of greatest need. Whether they were right is a matter of theology and lore debate, but whether they were right or wrong, the effect on morale was the same. And in a military context, morale is not a soft consideration. Morale is a hard, tactical reality. Men who believe they are about to sail beyond the protection of their god do not fight well. They make mistakes. They panic in crises. They break at the wrong moments. And in the Halo stars, where every moment might be a crisis, a force that has lost faith in its ability to survive is a force that has already lost. So even before we introduce a single monster, a single Xenos predator, a single ancient trap left by a dead civilization, the Halo stars are already a place where the basic infrastructure of Imperial survival has been stripped away. No navigation aids, no communications, no time stability, no rescue, no faith, just stars that have been dead longer than humanity has existed, and the things that have had all that time to make those dead stars their home. The rifts of Hecaton, the last door. There is a specific boundary in the Halo stars that deserves its own extended discussion, because it functions almost like a narrative threshold, a point past which the normal rules of the Coronis expanse, themselves already extremely dangerous by any rational measure, give way to something different, something that has swallowed everything sent into it without any acknowledgement of receipt. The Rifts of Hecaton. The rifts form the rimward boundary of the Coronis expanse, sitting at the farthest edge of even that partially explored region of the Halo stars. They are described as an unnatural darkness in the far depths of the expanse. Not a warp storm in the traditional sense, not a named tempest with defined edges that can be mapped and routed around. More like a deepening of the dark, a place where the stars become guttered and dead, where the already faint light of the Halo stars dims further still, or where the warp grows turbulent in ways that have killed navigators not through dramatic daemon attacks, but through the simple grinding impossibility of maintaining coherent course in conditions that were never meant to be navigated. The stars within the shadow of the rifts are described as ill-omened places. The sources that survive are fragmentary and contradictory, gathered from myths, distress signals that arrived garbled and incomplete, the testimony of crew members who turned back before entering, and the single, haunting story of the last ship of Cobras Aquare's fleet. Cobras Aquare was both a Lord Inquisitor and a rogue trader, which is an unusual combination that speaks to the kind of individual who made the Halo stars their destination. Yet he was powerful enough to command a fleet and connected enough to carry an inquisitorial mandate, which meant he had access to resources and authority that most rogue traders could only imagine. He assembled a fleet. He entered the rifts of Hecaton. He vanished. That last statement is true of many people and many fleets in the Halo stars, and would not on its own be worth dwelling on. But the story of Aquara has a coda that makes it genuinely haunting. One ship turned back. The frigate Elementis Vulpa, which was already damaged, was ordered by Aquare himself to retreat before the rest of the fleet plunged deeper into the rifts. The expectation, which Aquare apparently communicated clearly, was that the remainder of his fleet would meet their deaths within the rifts. What he was sending the Elementis Vulpa back, not because he believed it could bring help, but because he wanted someone to know what had happened. The crew of the Elementis Vulpa managed to reach Port Wonder, the way station at the edge of the Coronis Passage, and they brought with them two things: rumors of dead suns and lifeless darkness in the rifts. and a suggestion that whatever Acquair discovered inside, he sacrificed himself and his entire fleet willingly to prevent it from threatening human life. Subsequently, the Elementis Volpa and her crew disappeared. Many believe they were taken by the Ordo Xenos, who presumably wanted to contain whatever information the surviving crew carried about what lay in the rifts. Whether that information was extracted or buried, it is not available to us now. What we know is this: while the rifts of Hecaton have a quality that goes beyond simple navigational hazard, they have the quality of a warning. The dead stars within their shadow, called the Far Corp stars by some explorers, orbit their guttered suns behind curtains of cast-off stellar gas, veiled by the slow-moving remnants of their own dying. Some of these stellar corpses are the remnants of supernovae so ancient they occurred before the war in heaven, before the Eldar, before the Necrons in their current form. At the time these stars exploded, there may have been nothing in the galaxy complex enough to mourn them. And yet, despite their age, despite their lifelessness, despite the absolute absence of light and warmth, things appear to be stirring in those dead systems. The lore notes grimly that dire forces, dead for eons, may be waking on blasted worlds in the shadow of the rifts, that the warp is troubled in those regions in a way that suggests something old paying attention. Expeditions are periodically launched into the rifts of Hecaton, not with any expectation of return, if the historical record is to be honest, but because the rumors persist, rumors of long-dead Xenos civilizations, of warp gates that lead to anywhere in the galaxy, of artifacts so powerful that they justify the price. Not one of those expeditions has returned from inside the rifts. Some ships have turned back before entering, and a few of those have limped back to Port Wonder with crew members who aged decades in what felt like days, or who emerged from the warp speaking languages that had been dead for 10,000 years, or who could not stop looking over their shoulders even after they were safely docked. The Hecaton Cartel is a group reportedly known to haunt the fringes of the rifts, scavenging the wreckage of ships that approach and are destroyed or turned back before entering. Whether they have actually penetrated the rifts and found what is inside, or whether they simply profit from the wreckage of those who tried, is unclear. They do not appear to be forthcoming with their knowledge. What the rifts of Hecaton represent in the geography of the Halo stars is a final statement. You can reach the Coronis expanse. You can map parts of it. You can trade and fight and explore in its outer reaches. You can survive there, barely and expensively, with enough resources and luck. But the rifts mark the boundary beyond which that survival rate reaches zero. They are the last door, and the door only opens one way. Everything on the other side is the deep halo, where the corpse stars hang in their shrouds, where whatever happened to all those human worlds happened, where the silence is so old it has its own specific texture. The Ghoul stars, the galaxy's most haunted neighborhood. While the full extent of the Halo stars remains the great mystery, there is one sub-region that the lore has described in enough detail to give us a genuine sense of what the Halo stars at their most accessible and most terrifying look like. That region is the Ghoul stars, located in the galactic northeast, beyond the furthest reaches of the Segmentum Ultima and the Eastern Fringe, in territory that sits at the very edge of where the Astronomican's light barely reaches before giving out entirely. The name itself is instructive. Before it was the Ghoul stars, before the Imperium named it and assigned a Space Marine chapter to guard its borders, before it appeared on cartographic displays at the Administratum, this region was simply part of the galaxy. And that region, in the time before the Age of Strife, was home to human worlds. Not just a few, not some tiny scattered handful. The Ghoul stars had a number of human-inhabited worlds before something happened to them. This is important because it means we can compare before and after. We can see what these systems looked like when they were alive, and we can look at what is there now, and we can ask the question that Imperial investigators apparently asked, and then apparently decided they did not want answered. What happened to all those people? The worlds are dead. Not just depopulated, not just devastated in the way that a tyrannid hive fleet leaves a world stripped of its biosphere. Dead in a way that suggests total and ancient erasure. There are an unusually large number of dead worlds in the Ghoul stars, worlds where the geological and atmospheric record suggests life once existed, but where that life has been absent for so long that the ecology has not simply collapsed, but been forgotten by the planet itself, where even the basic chemical signatures of past biology are faint and fragmentary. Something came through the Ghoul stars before the Age of Strife, something that was very thorough. The leading theory, though the Imperium maintains this speculation even internally with some hesitation, involves an entity or group of entities called the Crave. The Crave are a telepathic predator species, one of those alien types in 40k that exists primarily as a dangerous background detail, encountered only in fragments, never fully described, never fully understood. They are predators that hunt the psychically active, which would explain why a region rich in human worlds, and humans produce more powerful psychers per capita than most species, would be particularly attractive to such hunters. But the Crave theory is speculation, labeled honestly as speculation in the sources that mention it. Whatever killed those worlds before the Age of Strife may have been the Crave. It may have been something else entirely. It may have been more than one thing, operating at different times, each contributing to the cumulative silence. What is certain is that something killed those worlds, and something, possibly the same something, or possibly a whole collection of somethings, still lives there. The Xenos species that inhabit the Ghoul stars are described in the lore with a certain careful vagueness that feels deliberate. Phrases like, so alien as to be seemingly born out of the legendary nightmares of mankind, and creatures so alien they seem to be born out of the supernatural. These are not the descriptions of a culture that has systematically catalogued what it found. These are the descriptions of a culture that encountered things it did not have adequate frameworks to describe, and which is still processing the experience. Among the named horrors, which we will address in much more detail later, are the Scythor fiends, the Togaran bloodreeks, and the Bone Kingdom of Drazzac. Each of these represents a different flavor of the Ghoul star's awfulness. The Scythor fiends represent the incomprehensible, things that look almost recognizable in silhouette, but are fundamentally, philosophically wrong in their existence and behavior. The Togaran bloodreeks are barely referenced at all, existing only as a name in the records, which suggests either that they are so dangerous that studying them closely is lethal, or that the encounters with them were too brief and too horrifying to generate much documentary evidence. And Drazzac, which we will come to, is something categorically unlike either, a place that has made even the most senior Necron commanders want to look away. There is also the matter of what the Ghoul stars do to things that pass through them, not just to people, to things that are themselves extraordinarily dangerous by any normal measure. In 977 of the 41st Millennium, a splinter fleet from one of the Tyranid hive fleets appeared on the border of the Ghoul stars. Now, Tyranids are not known for being disoriented or confused. They are the product of billions of years of evolution across multiple galaxies, a distributed consciousness of almost inconceivable size and adaptability, and they have consumed entire biospheres without particular difficulty. They are not easily rattled. This splinter fleet emerged from the Ghoul stars disoriented and twisted. That is the lore's exact description. The Tyranids were twisted by their passage through the region. The hive mind, that vast and terrible networked intelligence that directs Tyranid behavior, it was somehow disrupted enough by whatever the Ghoul stars contain that individual organisms emerged from the region behaving erratically, their bioforms altered in ways inconsistent with any known Tyranid adaptation, their coordination with the broader hive mind apparently disrupted or fragmented. They attacked the sentinel world of Orask like a disorganized beast, rather than the coordinated surgical instrument that Tyranid forces usually represent. The defenders barely held, and the thing that saved them, the stoic resistance of Orask's population, backed by a full company of the Red Talon Space Marines and a Titan maniple from the Legio Magna, the great battle that kept the Ghoul stars from spilling over into inhabited space that year, was won against Tyranids that were, by their own terrifying standards, having a bad day. Healthy, fully coordinated Tyranids would not have been stopped.
Okay, I want to step out the narrator mode for just a second, because this is the part of the lore that genuinely gets to me. Like, I spent a lot of time reading about 40k, I know what's in the Eye of Terror, I know what Tyranids do to a world, I've read the Necron Codex entries about tomb worlds waking up, and I find all of it fascinating in that comfortable, safe, kind of scary way. You know, grimdark from a distance. But the Halo stars are different for me. Something about the sheer oldness of it, the fact that it's not even properly hostile, it's just ancient and different and full of things that were here before us and will be here after us, that hits in a way the other factions don't. The orcs want to fight you. Chaos wants to corrupt you. At least those things want something you can understand. The Halo stars just don't care, and I find that so much more unsettling than anything else in this setting. But anyways, let's go back to the video.
This is what the Ghoul stars do. They take things that are already terrifying and they make them wrong. The pale wasting, the horror that destroyed 11 Space Marine chapters. Now we come to the event in the history of the Ghoul stars that most clearly illustrates just how much of a genuine existential threat this region can produce when it decides to wake up. An event so terrible that the Imperium, which maintains historical records going back 10,000 years and takes meticulous note of its own suffering for liturgical and strategic purposes, has largely suppressed and destroyed the evidence of it. An event that is referenced only in fragments, in contradictions, in veiled references, and carefully worded silences. The pale wasting. The date is the late 34th millennium. During the period known as the Nova Terra Interregnum, when the Imperium fractured into competing factions and two rival claimants to imperial authority fought a civil war that consumed enormous resources and attention. It was, historically, a period of maximum vulnerability for humanity. The institutions that existed to respond to major external threats were compromised, divided, and distracted. And from the Ghoul stars, during precisely that moment of vulnerability, something emerged. What that something was is not clear from any single source, because the sources contradict each other. Some surviving fragments describe the pale wasting as a star-spawned plague, a disease or biological agent of some kind that swept across worlds with terrifying speed, a contagion that came from the Ghoul stars and killed on a planetary scale. And other fragments describe the same event as nightmare engines, mechanical or mechanical-organic constructs of alien design that moved from system to system and slaughtered populations in a way more consistent with industrial extermination than biological infection. These two descriptions are deeply inconsistent with each other, and yet they both apparently refer to the same event. One possibility is that the pale wasting involved multiple distinct phenomena that operated together or in sequence. A plague that weakened worlds, followed by mechanical harvesters that finished them, or engines that damaged planetary infrastructure in ways that created conditions for disease. Or something that simply defies easy categorization as either organic or mechanical, because it was neither or both. Here, what the Nova Marines know about this conflict is notable for a specific reason. The Nova Marines are a Space Marine chapter, an ultramarine successor with a distinguished history, and a careful record of their battle honors going back to their founding. They are not a chapter that forgets things. Their chronicles are extensive and carefully maintained. And yet when it comes to the Pale Wasting campaign, in which the Nova Marines indisputably participated, which is noted as one of the chapter's earliest recorded battle honors, the Nova Marines' own chronicles are empty. Completely, deliberate, conspicuously empty. There is no battle account, no tactical record, no casualty roll, no note of which systems were defended or at what cost. Just nothing. Space Marines do not forget their battles. The absence of any record in the Nova Marines chronicles is not accidental. It is a deletion. Someone, possibly the chapter leadership itself, possibly the Inquisition, possibly someone higher, decided that the Nova Marines' knowledge of the Pale Wasting was something that should not be available to later readers. The information was not lost. It was removed. What we have is a number of Space Marine chapters that took part in the campaign to stop the Pale Wasting. Multiple chapters, perhaps as many as 12. This is already extraordinary. The mobilization of 12 Space Marine chapters for a single crisis represents a response at the scale of a Black Crusade. The resources required, the coordination required, the sheer weight of decision-making at the highest levels of the Imperium required to commit that many Astartes to a single region. All of it speaks to a threat that was considered apocalyptic by those who understood its scope. Of those 12 chapters, the Nova Marines survived. The others evidently did not. Or at least, if they survived, their survival was conditional on something that cannot be spoken of plainly in the historical record. 11 Space Marine chapters. Gone. The records of the campaign are censored or destroyed. The Nova Marines do not talk about it. An ancient stele in the Imperial Palace on Holy Terra, one of those pieces of stone that was carved so long ago that most of the people who read it don't really understand what they're looking at. Add to references the bravery of the chapter in a context that those who know to look for it recognize as relating to this conflict. The bravery of one chapter, the silence about the others. The Pale Wasting was eventually contained. That much is certain, because the galaxy is still here, and the Ghoul stars have not swallowed everything. But the cost of containing it was something the Imperium has decided not to memorialize, not to discuss, and actively to erase from accessible history. The Death Specters chapter was created specifically to maintain a perpetual vigil at the borders of the Ghoul stars, to ensure that whatever the Pale Wasting was, it never repeats at that scale. The existence of a dedicated chapter standing permanent guard over a region is a statement. It says that the threat is not resolved. It says that the region still requires watching. It says that what was contained might become uncontained if vigilance lapses. Whatever the Pale Wasting was, it remains in the Ghoul stars, waiting. That is not speculation. The necessity of the Death Spectre's ongoing vigil confirms it. The threat is real, it is persistent, and it is patient. It has been waiting in those dark stars since before the Age of Strife, rising periodically to test the borders of the galaxy's living regions, sinking back when repelled. It cannot be killed. It can only be watched. This is the thing that destroyed 11 Space Marine chapters, and we don't even know what it is. The Scytherines and the things that cannot be killed. Among the specific named threats of the Ghoul stars, the Scytherines occupy a special place. Not because they are the most powerful thing in that region, but because they are the most thoroughly documented example of a recurring pattern that defines the Halo stars as a whole. They are a species that cannot be exterminated because extermination, as the Imperium understands it, does not apply to them. Let's establish what we know about the Scytherines before we discuss why they're so troubling. The Scytherines, classified by Imperial xenobiologists as Homindae crystallis, are humanoid in rough outline. They are tall and slender, with limbs described as spindly and wire-thin, a physiology that in a human being would suggest fragility, but which in the Scytherines apparently does not. Their skin has a glassy, reflective quality, and their faces are elongated and inhuman in a way that is described specifically as a grotesque mockery of the human face, which is a particular and intentional kind of wrongness. They don't look random. They look like something designed a face to resemble humanity, just closely enough to be disturbing, and then deliberately made it wrong. They have deep pits instead of eyes, and something in those pits produces a light, and that light apparently has the ability to temporarily paralyze anyone who meets their gaze. Their technology is crystal-based. We don't know what that means in any technical detail, and the Adeptus Mechanicus, who would normally be the ones to investigate alien technology with obsessive thoroughness, apparently did not get close enough to the Scytherines' equipment long enough to study it adequately, which is itself a statement about how encounters with Scyther fiends typically ended. What is known is that their civilization was centered on a gas giant in the Ghoul stars designated 9836-18 Grave Core by Imperial cartographers, and that their crystal fortress cities occupied enormous atmospheric platforms above this world. Every scout team the Imperium sent into Scyther fiend territory before the Ghoul Stars Crusade never returned. This is worth noting clearly. Not most did not return, not many. Every single reconnaissance probe, every infiltration team, every exploratory vessel sent to gather intelligence on the Scyther fiends was lost. They did not come back with data. They did not come back with partial data. They came back not at all. The Death Specters chapter, which guards the Ghoul stars, that had their own history with the Scyther fiends that preceded the Crusade. At some point, before the Black Templars got involved, the Death Specters launched a major offensive campaign against the Scyther fiends, clearly intending to eliminate them. They reached the Scyther fiend homeworlds. The worlds were empty. Not abandoned, not evacuated in a rush, not the aftermath of a retreat, just empty. The Scyther fiends were gone, completely and without trace, and their crystal fortress cities still floated above the gas giant's clouds, intact, as if the inhabitants had simply ceased to exist. Eventually, the Scyther fiends reappeared and reclaimed their worlds. This is the critical detail. They came back. From wherever they had gone, using whatever technology allowed them to vanish from an entire planet without leaving evidence of departure, they simply returned. The Death Specters, after this experience, made a strategic decision. They stopped trying to exterminate the Scyther fiends and instead limited their activity to repelling any Scyther incursion outward from the Ghoul stars. They adjusted their entire operational doctrine because of what they learned from that first campaign, that the Scyther fiends cannot be permanently defeated by any means the Imperium currently possesses. Then, in 990 of the 41st Millennium, High Marshal Helbrecht of the Black Templars rose to his position and declared the Ghoul Stars Crusade. Helbrecht is one of the most capable Space Marine commanders of that era, a warrior of enormous personal faith and formidable strategic ability, and his crusade against the Scyther fiends was, by the metrics the Imperium normally uses, extraordinarily successful. Over 8 years, the Xenos population of the outlying systems was effectively exterminated. System after system was cleansed, the alien defenders overrun, the Blood Templars' righteous fury proving entirely adequate to the conventional military task. Thousands of Scyther fiends died. Hundreds of systems were reclaimed. And then, the crusade pushed toward Grave Core, the homeworld. They found it empty. Again. The Death Specters, Captain Narush, who accompanied the Black Templars during the crusade, remarked that this outcome was not surprising. He noted that whatever the Imperials chose to do to the gas giant, it would not matter in the long run, because the Scyther fiends always returned to reclaim their worlds. This is not a guess. This is the testimony of someone who had watched it happen before. That the Black Templars attempted exterminatus on the gas giant. The world appeared to resist it, which is a sentence that does not have a good explanation in any known physics. Gas giants do not resist exterminatus actions. The conditions that make an exterminatus action possible on a rocky world are different from those on a gas giant. Yes, and there are technical challenges involved, but the resistance described goes beyond engineering difficulty into something more fundamental. The world itself appeared to absorb or deflect the damage. The Black Templars bombarded the planet's atmosphere for an unnaturally long time before the attempt to ignite it produced any significant result, and even after they destroyed the orbital platforms, what they achieved felt provisional, as if they were rearranging furniture in a house whose owner was temporarily away. Then the call came from Armageddon. The greenskin horde of Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka had returned, and the Third War for Armageddon demanded the Black Templars' presence. Helbrecht directed his forces toward Armageddon. The mystery of the Scythor fiends, the question of where they had gone and what they had been protecting in those core systems, was left unresolved. In the era Indomitus, after the opening of the Great Rift, a Scythor fiend was sighted aboard the 7th Blackstone Fortress in the western reaches, far from the Ghoul stars, still alive, still present. Rogue trader Janus Drake, consulting Aeldari texts in his possession, concluded that the Scythor fiends possessed technology advanced enough to evade Helbrecht's crusade entirely, transporting themselves somewhere out of reach and simply waiting for the moment to pass. The Aeldari, who have their own long history of encounters with things that should be dead and are not, apparently had documentation for this capability. What the Scythor fiends represent is not just a military threat. They represent a philosophical one. The Imperium's response to threatening Xenos is annihilation. This is not cruelty for its own sake. It is the product of historical experience with alien species that proved capable of adapting, recovering, and returning when not completely destroyed. The Imperium's xenocidal doctrine exists because partial victories against Xenos species have historically resulted in those species eventually threatening humanity again, sometimes in worse forms, sometimes centuries later. The Scythor fiends have defeated this doctrine completely. They cannot be annihilated. They can be reduced, displaced, temporarily driven away, but they always come back. And the technology that allows them to do this is beyond the Imperium's ability to analyze, counter, or replicate. They exist in the Ghoul stars as a standing proof that the rules which make Imperial strategic doctrine coherent do not universally apply. Out here, in the old dark, things play by different rules. Or rather, by the same rules they always have. Rules that humanity is very late to the universe and still learning. The Bone Kingdom of Drazzac. If the Scythor fiends represent the incomprehensible alien, the Ghoul stars also contain something from humanity's own dark mirror. Something that should be recognizable, because it was built by a species that once had recognizable motivations, but which has decayed so far from its origins that what remains is more nightmare than echo. The Bone Kingdom of Drazzac. Drazzac is a world in the Ghoul stars, a cold, dead rock under a cooling star, and it is populated entirely by flayed ones. For those unfamiliar, flayed ones are necrons, those ancient metal beings who 65 million years ago transferred their consciousnesses into immortal mechanical bodies and then slept for most of the intervening eons while the galaxy changed around them. Necrons are by default already deeply unsettling, but flayed ones are the specific subset of Necron society that even other Necrons consider a problem. The origin of the flayed curse is ancient and terrible. When the Necrons rose up against their Hecaton masters and shattered most of those stellar godlike entities into fragments, one of the Hecaton who faced them, the being called Landugor the Flayer, was not sharded. It was destroyed utterly, but before it died, it was aware enough and spiteful enough to curse those who killed it, seeding the Flayer virus into their neural processes. This virus is not biological. It is a software infection, a corruption of the machine consciousness that drives Necron bodies, and it manifests as an unbearable, irrational hunger for flesh, specifically the flesh of living beings. The flayed one wants to wear living skin, to surround its metal skeleton with the warmth of organic material, to recreate the biological existence it surrendered 65 million years ago in the biotransference. And it cannot stop wanting this any more than a person with severe addiction can simply choose to stop being addicted. Healthy Necron society deals with flayed ones by killing them before the virus fully manifests, or by exiling those already transformed. Drazzac is where the exiled ones go, where generations of exiled flayed ones have accumulated over the long centuries of the Necron dynasty's slow awakening. The streets of Drazzac's dead cities are full of these creatures, fighting each other for scraps of meat and bone, driven by the constant, gnawing hunger that their metal bodies cannot satisfy, but cannot ignore. The world is ruled by a Necron lord called Valgul, the Fallen. He is called the Fallen because he is, by most measures, fallen far below what a Necron overlord should be. And yet he is also, in a terrible way, the sanest being on Drazzac, because he is the only one on the entire world who has not succumbed to the Flayer virus's full madness. He sits on a throne built from splintered bones and tanned skin, which is the most Drazzac thing imaginable, and he rules over a population of genuinely deranged beings through the only currency that matters to them: meat. Every few months, when the last scraps of flesh on Drazzac have been fought over too thoroughly to provide anything but fragments, Ghoul stands from his throne and announces what he calls the time of bounty. His Necron fleets lift from Drazzac and raid nearby worlds, not for resources, not for strategic advantage, not to expand the kingdom's territorial holdings, simply to harvest living creatures, to bring back the blood and flesh that his subjects crave. The raids are apparently devastating in their efficiency because Necron technology, however corrupted by the virus's presence, remains extraordinarily advanced, and the worlds near Drazzac have presumably been subject to these periodic raids for a very long time. The mystery of Ghoul deepens when you read the Twice Dead King novel series, which expanded substantially on this corner of the lore. The protagonist, Altix, is a Necron overlord whose dynasty has become heavily afflicted by the Flayer curse. He sets out for Drazzac as a last resort, considering Ghoul a myth because he cannot believe a Necron could maintain sanity after the virus fully takes hold. When he arrives, Drazzac is completely empty. Not abandoned, not cleared, simply empty, as if it had been waiting for him. And as the narrative progresses, and it becomes clear that Altix himself may be becoming Ghoul, that the title may pass through time in a way that should not be possible, that the dimension the flayed ones use to travel, called the Ghost Wind, may have temporal properties that allow Ghoul's story to loop backward through its own history, each successor becoming the predecessor in a cycle that makes the concept of the original Ghoul meaningless. This is the level of metaphysical strangeness that Drazzac contains. Even by Necron standards, which already involve 65 million-year sleep cycles and the memories of civilizations older than human history, Drazzac is a place where normal Necron metaphysics have broken down, where the curse of the slaughtered Scytherine has created a space outside time's normal operation, where Necron lords can become their own precursors. And this is in the Ghoul stars, on a world that is technically, in galactic terms, one of the closer and more accessible parts of the Halo stars. This is one of the things that researchers studying the Halo stars can actually document with reasonable confidence. Imagine what sits in the deep Halo, in the regions that swallow every expedition without comment. Halo devices, the gifts of dead gods. No discussion of the Halo stars would be complete without addressing the most immediate, most personal, and in some ways most terrifying thing they have exported into the inhabited regions of the galaxy. Not a species, not a plague, something that comes in the form of a gift. The Halo devices, also called Halo artifacts in some sources, are Xenos objects found among the ruins of ancient civilizations in the Halo stars. That they are discovered on worlds that are truly ancient and utterly lifeless, orbiting dead stars that burned their brightest many thousands of millennia ago. The worlds themselves hold nothing. No breathable atmosphere, no surviving ecology, nothing that could have been alive in any recent epoch. Just ruins, in some cases vast and cyclopean in scale, reduced to basalt fragments and shattered stone that even the almost infinitely slow processes of geological erosion have had millennia to work over, ancient beyond any meaningful reference point. And in the rubble of these dead civilizations, the Halo devices wait. They look like small objects, smooth carbuncular talismans, like a polished stone with a strange weight to it. Miniature fossil curios, or resembling a trilobite from old Earth's prehistoric seas, but made of a material that is not quite metal and not quite stone. Orbs with fluid and glossy surfaces that seem to move when you look at them from the right angle. They are variable in form, variable in appearance, and utterly consistent in certain qualities. They do not age. They defy Auspex analysis. They cannot be damaged by any force short of the kind that would also destroy them completely. They are effectively indestructible, perfectly preserved, and they radiate an absence, a sense that the normal passage of time simply does not apply to them. They also bond with living beings, and that is where the nightmare begins. The bonding process for a Halo device, as documented by inquisitorial investigation over the centuries, which proceeds in stages that the sources describe as primary, secondary, and tertiary phases, each more severe and more irreversible than the last. In the primary phase, after a Halo device bonds with a host, the effects are initially subtle. Paranoia sets in, mood swings become severe. The host begins to hear strange voices in the dark, whispers in frequencies no one else can perceive. They stop requiring normal amounts of sleep, except for a few comatose hours every few days, during which they experience vivid, specific nightmares of alien landscapes and cities under mysterious stars. Not vague nightmares, precise ones. Cities with architecture that no human architect has ever conceived, under skies with no constellations that appear in any human star chart. The nightmares are not random. They are memories, or something like memories, or of places that actually existed, whatever tense applies to civilizations that died 100,000 years ago. In the secondary phase, the physical changes begin. The area where the device bonded to the flesh starts to alter. The skin becomes mottled, tough, hardened like insect chitin, or it becomes desiccated and cold, like the prepared flesh of an embalmed corpse. The body heals almost any damage. The host becomes inhumanly fast and strong and resilient. They no longer sleep, eat, or drink. They no longer age. The body is effectively immortal, sealed against time and injury, in a way that surpasses any rejuvenate treatment, any augmetic surgery, any biological modification that the Imperium's tech priests know how to perform. But the strange hungers that began in the primary phase have grown, and they have grown specific. As some hosts develop an addiction to spending long periods in total darkness, others need exposure to intense solar radiation, immersion in it, soaking in it for hours to soothe the itch of their altered physiology. And some develop hungers that are recognizable as something much worse, hungers for the substance of the living, for blood, for flesh. In the secondary phase, these hungers are manageable. In the tertiary phase, they may not be. The tertiary phase is where the host has essentially ceased to be human in any meaningful functional sense. The transformation is total. The personality is fractured by the alien memories that keep surfacing, by the whispers that have grown from background noise to constant presence, by the hungers that structure their existence more than any human desire. They are effectively immortal. They are extraordinarily dangerous, and they are deeply, fundamentally alien to themselves, inhabited by the echoes of whatever civilization left these devices behind. Those who seek Halo devices do so because they want one specific thing above all else: immortality. Real immortality, not the pale imitation of preserved flesh in a life support sarcophagus, not the perpetual twilight state of an archoflagellant or a servitor, but genuine, functional, vigorous biological immortality of the kind that the most powerful beings in the galaxy seem to possess. Rejuvenate treatments extend life to a point. Augmetics replace decaying organs with functional substitutes. But eventually, even the most powerful and wealthy individuals in the Imperium face the fundamental limitation of biological death. The Halo devices offer a way past that limit. Yet the price is that the limit exists for good reasons. What the devices represent is something that the Inquisition, in its typically understated way, has declared a threat worthy of centuries of constant attention. Dedicated inquisitorial cells have spent entire careers researching and hunting Halo devices. Entire congregations of inquisitors have been created specifically to address the trade in these objects, and some of those congregations have themselves been destroyed in that work. Not figuratively destroyed, physically eliminated. The trade in halo devices, which serves an clientele of the wealthy and desperate and power-hungry, is maintained by people who have the resources to fight back against inquisitorial attention. The civilization that made these devices is gone. The worlds on which they are found are dead, at the stars above them cooling, the ruins in which they are discovered older than most of the galaxy's current inhabitants. Whatever beings made the halo devices understood the relationship between consciousness and biology at a level far beyond anything the Adeptus Mechanicus has achieved or even dreamed of. They could redesign a living organism from inside out, using a small artifact as the delivery mechanism, transforming it over years into something that bore almost no relationship to what it had been. They were capable of encoding information, memories, the ghost of a culture's entire experiential history, into an object small enough to fit in one hand, in a format stable enough to survive for hundreds of thousands of years, in conditions that would destroy any known storage medium. They are dead, their worlds are silent, and their legacy continues to reach into the inhabited galaxy through these small, perfectly preserved gifts that offer everything and take everything in return. The Halo devices are, in their way, the most personal horror the Halo stars export. Not a fleet, not a plague, a small object, an offer, a transformation that begins with something you want and ends with something you would not have chosen to be. The makers of the Halo devices did not disappear because they were destroyed, or at least there is no specific record of their destruction. They simply seem to have reached a point in their transformation at which they were no longer recognizable as whatever they had been when they made those devices. They became something else. Something the ruined planets still hold the memory of, in the shape of the architecture and the angle of the ruins and the deep scarring of certain rock formations that suggests energies being discharged in ways that have no modern parallel. They became something the Halo stars still contain. Macccarius, at the edge of the world. There is a moment in the history of the Imperium, in the 41st Millennium, that reads almost like the galaxy exhaling. A moment where the most powerful human military force assembled since the Horus Heresy reached the absolute edge of Imperial space and then stopped. Not because it was defeated, not because it ran out of resources, not because the Emperor withdrew his favor. It stopped because the men and women in it looked at what was ahead and collectively decided, with the kind of certainty that comes from the bone rather than the head, that they would not go there. Yet the Macccarian crusade ran from 392 to 399 of the 41st millennium, 7 years of almost continuous warfare on the far western edge of the galaxy, in the Segmentum Pacificus. Lord Commander Solar Macccarius, whom most imperial historians consider the greatest purely human military commander of the 41st millennium, and comparable in tactical and strategic genius to the Primarchs themselves, despite having no genetic augmentation whatsoever, led this crusade and reclaimed nearly 1,000 worlds in those 7 years. That number should be understood in context. The entirety of human civilization within the Imperium spans hundreds of thousands of worlds, reclaiming 1,000 of them in 7 years, fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously, coordinating armies spread across hundreds of light years. This is an achievement so staggering that Macccarius was venerated as a saint after his death, and even he could not make himself cross into the Halo Zone. By the final stages of the crusade, Macarius's armies had reached the very boundary of the Segmentum Pacificus, the outermost edge of the established Imperium, and the last systems where the Astronomican's light still provided meaningful navigation guidance. Ahead lay the Halo Zone, that section of the Halo stars accessible from the Western Galaxy. The peoples and civilizations of those worlds, cut off from the Imperium for thousands of years, had never known the Emperor. And that, for Macccarius, who was something approaching sincerely devout in addition to being a military genius, should have been reason enough to push forward. He wanted to push forward. His own accounts, the speeches he gave to his men, make clear that he genuinely believed the Emperor's light should be carried into those dark stars. His famous quote on the eve of the campaign, that the stars were humanity's by right and that the things waiting in the void were afraid of humanity, reads as sincere conviction rather than rhetorical performance. Macccarius was not a man who led from fear, but his generals and his troops were. They had been sending scout teams into the Halo Zone during the final stages of the crusade. Standard military practice, reconnaissance ahead of the advance. Most of those scout teams never returned. The ones that did return came back altered. They told of strange phenomena, of star systems that felt wrong in ways they struggled to articulate. They reported worlds inhabited by something they called ghosts, which may have been metaphorical and may not have been. They reported navigational impossibilities, the warp behaving in ways that their training had not prepared them for, the Astronomican signal fading to nothing before they had gone as far as they expected. Their timeline for the mission compressed or expanded by warp currents that their navigators could not predict. They came back speaking of darkness that was different from ordinary darkness, of a quality of the void in the Halo Zone that registered in some part of the human brain as fundamentally wrong, as a place that was not meant for people. The troops whispered to each other in camp. The old stars were haunted. The worlds around them were inhabited by ghosts. The Halo Zone was not a place for living men. These were soldiers who had fought across dozens of worlds, who had faced Chaos Marines and alien armies, and whatever else the Western Galaxy could throw at an Imperial crusade. They were not easily frightened. They were speaking from something deeper than fear, from that part of the human organism that evolved specifically to recognize certain kinds of wrong and respond with the very simple impulse to leave. The generals came to Macccarius and pleaded with him to reconsider. They cited the navigation difficulties, the communication blackout that astropaths would face, the demoralization of the troops, the impossibility of maintaining supply lines across a region where warp travel was unreliable and time dilation was extreme. All of these were genuine tactical concerns, and Macccarius knew it. He knew that to push into the Halo Zone in those conditions would not have been bold leadership. And it would have been throwing a tired, fearful army into an environment that was specifically structured to kill it, for no strategic gain that could be clearly identified, against an enemy that had not been defined and might not be definable. Many of his troops also felt something else. They felt that beyond the range of the Astronomicon, they would be beyond the Emperor's protection. This belief was widespread and deeply felt, not an edge case or a fringe concern, but a majority position among the ranks. The Emperor was their protector. The Astronomicon was his light. To sail beyond that light was to sail unprotected into dark water, and whatever was in that dark water had been sitting there for a very long time and was presumably not friendly. Macccarius knew his crusade had reached its end. His armies had run out of energy, yet their faith was wavering at the critical moment, and even his own genius could not identify a clear path to victory in a region that swallowed scout teams without response. He made the decision that was correct in the sense of preserving his forces and his campaign's legacy, and deeply painful in the sense of a man who had spent his life reaching and who was now being stopped by something he could not fight. He turned back. He died the following year, having conquered nearly 1,000 worlds, and then stopped at the threshold of the Halo Zone. The territories he conquered fell into civil war after his death, the Macccarian heresy, as his generals turned on each other for control of the spoils. Most of those worlds were eventually lost again. The great westward expansion of the Imperium that his crusade represented proved temporary. But the Halo Zone remained where it was, patient, unchanged, still consuming every expedition that entered it, still returning the silence that is its only consistent output. If it noticed Macccarius at all, it gave no sign. There is a melancholy texture to this story that deserves to sit with for a moment. Macccarius was a man who had spent his entire adult life reaching. His crusade was an act of almost incomprehensible ambition, carried out by someone who genuinely believed that humanity had a claim on the stars and that claim needed defending by showing up and planting a flag. He was not a man who accepted limits easily. His entire career was built on rejecting what others considered impossible and doing it anyway, more elegantly and more decisively than anyone thought possible. And here, at the edge of the Halo Zone, he found a limit that could not be rejected. Not because the military obstacles were insurmountable, though they were real enough, but because something in the quality of the darkness ahead was different from anything he had faced before. Something in the reports from his scout teams, in the whispers of his troops, in the specific silence that came back from every probe he sent forward, communicated to him with absolute clarity that this was where the rules changed. He had spent 7 years fighting by the Imperium's rules, the rules of imperial doctrine and military logic, and the calculus of conquest. And the Halo Zone was a place where those rules did not apply, where they had never applied, where whatever had developed in that old dark had done so by completely different principles. And the cost of discovering those principles was every life and every ship he sent to find them. Macccarius understood this. That is why the moment is recorded the way it is. Not as a defeat or a failure, but as a decision. A rare, clear-eyed acknowledgement that the bravest and most tactically sound choice was to stop, to look at the darkness and say, not today, not like this, not with these people who have already given everything they have. The Halo Zone has been receiving that answer from every expedition since. It does not seem to mind. It is worth noting what happened to the worlds Macccarius did conquer, the nearly 1,000 systems he brought under the Imperial banner in those 7 extraordinary years, because it adds one more layer to the tragedy. After his death, the Macccarian heresy consumed those gains, yet his generals turned on each other, spending the military resources he had built in internal warfare over succession rather than consolidating the territories he had won. Many of those worlds were lost. The people he had liberated and introduced to the Imperium were, in many cases, abandoned to whatever came next, without the full infrastructure of imperial governance to protect them. The greatest military campaign in the 41st millennium ended not with a permanent expansion of human civilization, but with a demonstration of how difficult it is to hold what has been won. This pattern is relevant to the Halo stars because it is predictive. Even if an expedition into the deep Halo managed to find and map a significant region of those ancient systems, the question of what comes after is genuinely unanswerable. Without reliable warp travel, without astropathic communication, without the ability to maintain supply lines and governance structures, any territory claimed in the Halo stars is territory in name only. The practical capacity to defend, govern, and sustain it does not exist. It would be a flag planted in the dark, with no one coming to reinforce the planter, and whatever lived there long before the flag arrived would still be living there long after the flag had crumbled to dust. The Death Specters. Warriors sworn to the vigil. Because the Ghoul stars exist, because the things in the Ghoul stars have a documented history of emerging to threaten inhabited space, and because the scale of that threat when it fully manifests is enough to destroy 11 Space Marine chapters and consume entire sectors, the Imperium made a decision at some point in the history of the Space Marine foundings. They created a chapter specifically to stand between the Ghoul stars and the rest of the galaxy. A chapter whose sole purpose is to watch, to maintain that vigil indefinitely, without relief from the main body of the Imperium, without supply lines, without the institutional support that most Space Marine chapters take for granted. The Death Specters are of the 13th founding, also called the Dark Founding, about which the Imperium is unusually reticent, even by its own secretive standards. The 13th founding produced chapters of unusual and unusual to document capabilities, and what little is known about the Death Specters confirms that they are not a standard pattern Astartes chapter in any meaningful sense. Their homeworld is Occludus, a cemetery world within the Ghoul stars, which immediately tells you something about their relationship to the region they patrol. They did not retreat to the edge of the Ghoul stars to watch it from safe distance. They built their fortress monastery in it. They live in the middle of what they are guarding against. Their entire culture has been shaped by centuries of existence within the most dangerous region in the northeastern galaxy, in a system so remote from the main Imperium that standard supply lines are functionally impossible. The Death Specters supply themselves through whatever the region provides, through trade with the scattered human worlds that still exist in the Ghoul Star's margins, through the spoils of their own combat operations, or through arrangements with other nomadic military forces that periodically pass through their operational area. The physical appearance of Death Specters is shaped by their gene seed's mutations, inherited from their progenitor, the Raven Guard. They tend toward extreme pallor, white or near-white skin, and in some cases albinism that gives them blood-red eyes alongside that corpse-pale complexion. They are bald or shave their heads. The lore notes that their armor is painted black, decorated with bones and fire imagery. They are, in short, a chapter that has fully internalized the aesthetic language of death, which makes sense for a group that lives in the galaxy's most active graveyard. Their chapter master holds a title in the local dialect of Low Gothic called the Mega, or the First Spectre, and the Magir has a burden that is unique among Space Marine leaders. Upon becoming chapter master, the Magir takes their seat on an artifact called the Shariax, the Throne of Glass. This throne does not merely confer command authority, it actively drains the life of whoever sits on it, consuming their vitality in exchange for a psychic output that the lore implies serves as a localized Astronomican substitute for the region. Given that the Death Specters operate far beyond the main Astronomican's effective range, this sacrifice is not ceremonial. It is functional. The Magir is slowly dying for the chapter's ability to navigate in a region that would otherwise be unnavigable, giving their life by degrees so their battle brothers can operate in the black of the Ghoul Stars. They do not step down when they want to. They do not rotate out of the position. They sit on the throne of glass until the throne kills them. This culture of sacrifice, of accepting death as a condition of service rather than an outcome to be avoided, is woven through everything the Death Specters do. Their initiates must die as part of their trials and be brought back. They literally experience death as a requirement for joining, which in practical terms means being killed and then revived through whatever methods the chapter possesses, with all the psychological transformation that involves. A Space Marine who has died and returned is a different being from one who has not, in ways that the Death Specters have built their entire philosophy around. Death is not an ending for them. It is a teacher. Now, this is appropriate for a chapter that spends its existence in a region defined by ancient death, by worlds that were alive and are not, by civilizations that reached their peak and then ceased, by the slow spectacle of stars that burned out so long ago that nobody who was present to see them die exists anywhere in the current universe. The Death Specters have learned what the Ghoul Stars teach, which is that death is not the opposite of existence but rather one of its modes. Things that are dead are not gone, they are changed. The Scythor fiends came back. Valgul's kingdom persists beyond any reasonable calculation of how long it should have lasted. The pale wasting, whatever it was, is still in there. The dead are not finished. The Death Specters, then, are watching the dead, making sure they stay in their place. In making sure the cycle of emergence and repulsion continues with humanity surviving each emergence, paying whatever price is required. It is a grimly specific vocation, and the chapter has maintained it for thousands of years, without complaint and without significant outside assistance. In the era Indomitus, with the Great Rift torn open and the Astronomican's effective range further complicated by the new realities of the galaxy, the Death Specters continue their vigil. The Oparian crusade of the Black Templars disappeared into the Ghoul Stars in the 42nd Millennium, and many believe they continue to fight on somewhere in there, adding another layer of active military presence to the region's ongoing situation. They are there. The Death Specters are there, watching, every day. The Magir sits on the throne of glass and gives a little more of their life so the chapter can function. Every day, the brothers of the chapter patrol the border between the Ghoul Stars and the rest of the galaxy, turning back or destroying whatever tries to emerge. Every day, the dead stars shine their cold light on ruins that are older than humanity's history, and in those ruins, the old threats wait for the next opportunity. What is striking about the death specters, when you sit with their lore long enough, is how completely their chapter culture has adapted to the specific demands of their posting. Most Space Marine chapters maintain a relationship with the broader Imperium that involves regular contact, shared resources, occasional joint operations, and the general cultural exchange that keeps a chapter connected to the civilization it serves. The Death Specters have essentially none of this. They are beyond the normal supply lines. They are beyond routine communication. They exist in a state of institutional isolation that would, in any other chapter, be a crisis. In the Death Specters, it is simply Tuesday. Their approach to recruiting reflects this, because there are no established Imperial worlds close enough to serve as normal recruitment grounds. The Death Specters have developed what can only be described as a salvage approach to building their ranks. When Ghoul Stars worlds face threats they cannot survive, the Death Specters sometimes extract individuals who demonstrate survival capability, relocating them to worlds that serve as breeding populations. From these populations, future initiates are drawn. It is not a comfortable arrangement by any normal standard, but the Death Specters operate in a region where normal standards are a luxury they cannot afford, and they have built their chapter's survival around pragmatic adaptations that would seem extreme in the comfortable heart of the Imperium, and are simply necessary in the Ghoul Stars. Their unique initiation, the requirement that aspirants die and be brought back, is also worth dwelling on in context. The Death Specters patrol a region defined by death in the most literal and ancient sense. Worlds that died, civilizations that died, stars that died. In the Ghoul Stars, death is not an event. It is the dominant condition of the environment. A chapter that has not personally confronted and moved through death is, in that environment, a chapter that lacks the most fundamental experiential education the region offers. The Shariax, the throne of glass that drains its occupant's life, is not a ceremonial torture. It is a solution to a specific technical problem. The region needs a psychic beacon, and the chapter's leader is the power source. The sacrifice is real and understood and accepted because the Death Specters have internalized, over millennia, that the watch they keep requires costs that most of the Imperium would find incomprehensible. The Carcharodons, sometimes called the Space Sharks, periodically move through the Ghoul Stars on their own operations, representing a second major Astartes presence in the region. Their relationship with the Death Specters is functional rather than warm, as two chapters who share an operational area and occasionally intersect in the pursuit of their respective missions, but who do not closely coordinate or deeply trust each other. The Angels Erythraean, another chapter that operates in the region, apparently manages to maintain trading relationships with the Carcharodons and other nomadic forces that pass through, which speaks to a certain pragmatic flexibility that the Ghoul Stars seems to cultivate in those who operate there long enough. You adapt or you die, and in the Ghoul Stars, the things that kill you are patient enough to wait for you to make the wrong choice. What the Death Specters ultimately represent is a human answer to the Halo Stars. Not a triumphant answer, not a complete one, not even a particularly comfortable one, but a persistent one. As a group of human beings who looked at everything the Ghoul Stars contained and the everything the broader Halo Stars implied, and chose to stay, chose to watch, chose to spend their lives and the lives of their chapter masters in the slow business of maintaining a border that most of the Imperium does not even know exists. They are there every day the Scythor fiends might return. There every day the pale wasting might stir again. There every day whatever made the Halo devices might decide it is done being patient. They watch so the rest of the galaxy doesn't have to know exactly what they're watching for. And that is its own kind of mercy. The Halo scar and the warp's own verdict. Before we move into the final synthesis, there is one more feature of the Halo Stars that deserves specific attention, Yea, because it represents the warp itself, rendering a verdict on the region. A judgment from the dimension that underlies all of reality, expressed as a geographic feature so persistent and so total that even the most experienced navigators will not attempt to cross it. The halo scar. The halo scar is a warp disturbance that runs through the halo stars, described simply and clinically as making travel through it nearly impossible. In the context of warp travel in the 40k setting, nearly impossible is extraordinary qualification. The warp is full of regions that are dangerous or unreliable or unpredictable. Named warp storms like the Eye of Terror and the Screaming Vortex are regularly navigated by experienced crews, at great risk and cost, but with some expectation of success. Even the Maelstrom, or the massive warp storm near the galactic center, is penetrated by daring or desperate commanders on a reasonably regular basis. The halo scar is different. The framing is not that it is difficult to cross, or that it kills most who try. The framing is that it makes travel through it nearly impossible, as in the physical conditions within it are so extreme and so fundamentally contrary to coherent warp navigation that the success rate approaches zero by default, rather than by individual failure. It is not a dangerous crossing. It is a crossing that does not happen. This is the warp saying no. The dimension that underlies physical reality, the psychic ocean that the chaos gods swim in, the medium through which the Tyranids were theorized to track the presence of populated worlds across galactic distances. On that chaotic and terrible dimension is generating a persistent structural barrier in the halo stars that blocks meaningful transit. Whatever the warp is reacting to in the halo stars, whatever it is registering as an incompatibility that produces this scar, it is significant enough to affect the entire warp through that region. What that means practically is that even if you solved the Astronomicon problem, even if you had navigators capable of operating without the beacon, even if you had astropaths powerful enough to communicate across the necessary distances, you would still face the halo scar as a physical obstacle to meaningful transit through significant portions of the halo stars. You cannot simply route around it, because it is not a localized storm with defined edges, but a distributed disturbance throughout the region. To cross the halo stars in a way that would allow comprehensive exploration requires crossing or working around the scar, and the scar resists that. This is not a coincidence. Nothing in the halo stars is coincidence. The warp's response to the halo stars reflects what is in the halo stars, because the warp is shaped by the psychic and emotional reality of the universe. Great concentrations of demonic activity create warp storms. The aftermath of massive psychic events creates long-lasting warp disruptions. The presence of extremely powerful psychers or extremely powerful anti-psychic entities shapes the warp around them. The halo scar, persistent and ancient and comprehensive, reflects something about the nature of what has existed and what continues to exist in the halo stars that is so fundamentally disrupting to the underlying fabric of reality that the warp has been deformed by it in a permanent way. Something happened in the halo stars, something very old, something that left a mark not just on the physical universe, not just on the worlds and the civilizations and the dead stars, but on the dimension beneath physical reality itself. The halo scar is the scar from that wound, and the wound is old enough and deep enough that 65 million years of subsequent history have not healed it. Why nothing survives the full picture? We have traveled a long way through the dark tonight. We have stood at the rifts of Hecaton and watched Cobras Aquara's fleet disappear into their shadow, whilst we have walked the dead streets of worlds that once held human cities, under skies lit by the cold red glow of dying suns. We have tried to put names to things that resist naming, the pale wasting, the Scythor fiends, the bones of 11 Space Marine chapters scattered somewhere in the old dark. We have held a halo device in our minds, turned it over, tried to understand what it offers and what it costs. We have stood at the boundary of the halo zone with Macccarius and felt, in whatever way that kind of feeling translates across the distance of fiction and time, the particular cold quality of a darkness that does not want to be entered. Now let us bring it together. Let us answer the question that sits at the heart of all of this. Why does nobody survive the Halo stars? The answer is not simple, and that is important. And it would be satisfying and tidy to point at a single threat, a single monster or army or phenomenon, and say that this is why. But the Halo stars are not a narrative with a single antagonist. They are a system, a layered accumulation of reasons that compound each other, each one reducing the survival rate further, each one closing off the exits that the previous one left open. The first layer is navigational. Without the Astronomicon, you cannot navigate reliably in the warp. Without reliable warp navigation, your transit times become unpredictable, your temporal positioning becomes unreliable, and your ability to maintain any sort of strategic coherence across a multi-system operation collapses. You cannot coordinate, you cannot resupply, you cannot retreat on a predictable schedule. An expedition into the deep Halo is already, at the navigation layer alone, structurally compromised before it encounters anything hostile. The second layer is communications. Without astropathic communication, your expedition is invisible to the rest of the Imperium. If you find something, you cannot report it in time to matter. If you are attacked, you cannot call for help. If you discover why every previous expedition failed, there is no way to transmit that discovery to someone who could act on it. Each expedition begins from zero. Each fleet walks into the same darkness that consumed every previous fleet, unable to benefit from their predecessor's experience because that experience is silent. The silence is self-perpetuating. Every expedition that fails adds to the silence, rather than to the knowledge that might eventually allow success. The third layer is the resident threats. And the Ghoul. Stars alone contain flayed one kingdoms, crystal-shifting xenos that cannot be exterminated. Whatever the pale wasting actually was and remains, Tyrannid splinters twisted enough to attack erratically, and whatever the Krav may have done to prepare the region for subsequent occupants. The broader Halo stars contain the things that killed entire human civilizations before the Age of Strife, the civilizations of the Halo device makers, and whoever preceded them, the things that have been sitting in those old systems for so long that they have had time to refine their relationship with mortality to a point that makes conventional military doctrine inadequate. These threats are not encountered one at a time. In the Halo stars, they are environmental. They are the ambient condition of the region. You don't encounter them as discrete challenges that can be resolved and then set aside. You exist in them, the way deep sea creatures exist in pressure and cold and darkness, conditions that are not hostile events, but constant parameters. The fourth layer is the warp itself, which in the Halo stars is not simply a transit medium, but an active obstacle. The Halo scar disrupts meaningful navigation through significant portions of the region. The absence of the Astronomicon means even small-scale warp transits carry extreme risk. The time dilation effects compound over any extended expedition, creating situations where fleet coordination becomes impossible because ships that diverge even slightly in their warp routes emerge in real space at wildly different subjective times. An expedition that entered the Halo stars as a unified fleet might find itself, after a series of necessary warp transits, scattered across a span of years rather than a span of days. The fifth layer is the psychological one, and it is real, even if it is the least quantifiable. There is something about the Halo stars that does things to the people who enter them. The scout teams that came back from the Halo zone during Macccarius's crusade were changed in ways that their commanders noted and reported. The crews of ships that barely escaped the rifts of Hecaton spoke of phenomena that defy the vocabulary they had for describing what they experienced. The troops at the edge of the Halo zone who whispered to each other about ghosts and haunted stars were not necessarily wrong. The warp perceives emotional states, and emotional states of extreme fear and disorientation create warp conditions that amplify those emotions, which creates worse warp conditions, which amplifies the fear further. In the Halo stars, where the warp is already disturbed in ways that the halo scar makes visibly persistent. The psychological weight of the expedition's collective dread can become a material factor, not metaphorically, actually genuinely material, in a setting where the fabric of reality is sensitive to psychic influence. And then there is the sixth layer, which is perhaps the most troubling of all, because it implies agency. Whatever is in the deep halo stars is old enough that human civilization, which currently spans tens of thousands of years of recorded history and possibly several times that in reconstructed prehistory, is recent from its perspective. It has watched things come and go. It watched civilizations rise in those old systems and either destroy themselves or be destroyed. It watched the Elder at their height and whatever else occupied the galaxy during its Middle Ages. It has been watching. It has been learning. The dead worlds of the halo stars are not just ruins. They are, potentially, information. Records of what kinds of things approached, what strategies they used, what weaknesses they had. Every expedition that the Imperium sent into the halo stars, every rogue trader that pushed too deep, every fleet that sailed past the rifts of Hecaton, may have contributed to whatever it is in the deep dark learning something about humanity. Learning our navigation methods, learning our communications, learning our weapons and our doctrines and our failure modes. We send expeditions, they do not return, and whatever intercepted them does not return them. The halo stars are not a mystery waiting to be solved. They are a region that does not want to be known, that has spent more time ensuring it is not known than human civilization has existed, that has turned every attempt at exploration into another piece of silence added to the accumulating quiet of the long dark. The question is not really why nobody survives. The question, put honestly, is whether survival was ever the point of sending them. Because the results are so consistent, over such a long span of time, across so many different types of expeditions, using so many different levels of resources and capability, as that survival begins to look less like an intended outcome and more like a known sacrifice. A sacrifice of fleets and lives and knowledge, paid regularly, in exchange for whatever benefit is derived from trying. Maybe the benefit is maintaining the fiction that the halo stars are merely dangerous rather than actively claiming everything that enters them. Maybe the benefit is each expedition teaching the senders something about where exactly the boundary is, so that the main body of civilization can stay on the right side of it. Maybe there is no benefit, and the expeditions are sent anyway because there is something in human nature that looks at absolute darkness and thinks, there might be something worth finding in there. Macccarius thought that, and even he turned back. The halo stars sit at the edge of the galaxy and they wait. Yes, they have been waiting since before humanity reached the stars. They will be waiting after whatever happens next, patient in the way that only truly ancient things can be patient, with the specific stillness of something that has learned it does not need to hurry. Everything that it has ever wanted to reach it has reached, and everything that has ever gone to find it has found only the silence. A note on what we don't know. One more thing deserves saying, and it needs to be said directly rather than woven into the narrative above, because it is both a limitation of the discussion and, in its own way, one of the most compelling features of the halo stars as a piece of world building. We don't actually know what is in the deep halo stars. Not in the sense that the information has been hidden or classified within the fiction, although some of it has been. Not in the sense that it is knowable but we haven't reached it yet. In the genuine sense that Games Workshop, in writing the lore of the halo stars, chose to leave the deepest mystery of the region deliberately undefined. The things that swallow expeditions, the source of the pale wasting, the civilization that made the halo devices and then became something else. The specific nature of the old threats that the death specters spend their existence watching for. The contents of the deep halo that even the rifts of Hecaton serve as a buffer against. None of these are answered. They are described at the edges, illuminated in silhouette, given enough shape to be terrifying without being given enough definition to be limited. This is a sophisticated choice. There is a kind of horror that is maximally effective precisely because it is not fully described, because the imagination, working with partial information and filling in the gaps with whatever personal architecture of dread it has assembled over a lifetime, generates something more frightening than any specific description could. The halo stars are that kind of horror. They are defined by their effects, by the silence where ships should be, by the dead worlds where humans used to live, by the veteran soldiers who came back from the edge of the halo zone and would not describe what they had seen except in terms of wrongness, by the censored records of the pale wasting, by 11 chapters gone and no monument. The deepest reading of the halo stars is that they represent the honest admission, are written into the lore of a setting that is already uncompromisingly dark, that there are things in the universe old enough to be genuinely incomprehensible to human understanding, not alien in the manageable sense of different body plan, different chemistry, different culture, alien in the cosmically fundamental sense of operating from a perspective so long and so different that the concept of communication between that perspective and a 10,000-year-old spacefaring empire simply does not apply. Old enough that the galaxy's current dominant civilizations are the latecomers. Old enough that whatever they understand about survival, about time, about the relationship between consciousness and the cosmos, they learned before anything currently living existed to learn it. The halo stars are where the galaxy keeps its oldest secrets. Not locked away under guard, not deliberately hidden by any one power, simply sitting in the quiet of the old dark, under stars that have barely enough warmth left to call themselves stars, patient as only things that have outlasted everything can be patient. If you want to know what is in there, you can go and find out. The rifts of Hecaton are real. The Astronomicon fades there. The warp grows strange. Every expedition that went before you found something, presumably. None of them came back to tell you what. Maybe that means there is nothing to find. Maybe that means there is something very specific to find, and it does not want found things leaving. Maybe the silence is the message. Maybe after enough centuries of sending ships into the dark and receiving only silence back. Yet the correct interpretation is not that we haven't sent enough ships yet. Maybe it's that the silence is an answer. Final thoughts. If you have made it through all of this, through the layers of navigation failure and old dead worlds and horrors that precede humanity's presence in the galaxy and space marine chapters that vanished without a word, I want to sit with you in the quiet for just a moment before we close. The halo stars are one of those pieces of Warhammer 40,000 lore that does something genuinely uncommon in the setting. In a universe that is usually defined by baroque excess, by vast armies and continent-spanning fortresses and gods of war and entities of pure malice that have names and faces and doctrines, the halo stars are defined by absence, by negative space, by what is not there rather than what is. The absence of the Astronomicon, the absence of returned expeditions, the absence of records that should exist and have been removed, the absence of life on worlds that had life, the absence of the Scyther fiends when the Black Templars came to fight them, the absence of Ghoul when Ultics arrived at Drazzac and found only an empty throne waiting. Absence is a deeply human form of horror. We are creatures who live by connection, by recognition, by the presence of other minds in the world. When that presence goes missing, when the person doesn't come home and the phone doesn't ring and the room stays empty, that specific cold feeling is something that bypasses every rational defense and goes directly to the oldest part of the brain. And the halo stars are 200,000 light years of that feeling. 200,000 light years of rooms that should be full, of ships that should have returned, of voices that should have answered. The Imperium of man, for all its horror and darkness, is at least a civilization. It is something humans built. It has names and places and history. It is comprehensible in the way that human things are comprehensible even when they are terrible. The halo stars are something else. Something that was old before humanity was possible. Something that does not have a face in the lore because giving it a face would make it smaller than it is. Something that the death specters watch and the Inquisition monitors, and the Mechanicus would study, if it would allow itself to be studied. It won't. The halo stars keep their silence. The expeditions keep not coming back. The old stars keep burning down. And somewhere in the deep dark, in the cold light of stars older than anything alive, things that have been patient for a very long time continue to be patient. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But in the halo stars, there is something older than war, something that was here before the war, something that will be here after. The dark between the stars is patient. It has been waiting since the beginning, and it knows, with the absolute certainty of something that has already seen everything that can be lost, that it is not going anywhere. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most atmospheric corners of the 40k setting, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future explorations. This kind of deep, slow lore is exactly what Q on 40k is here for. Oh, and there is so much more of the setting that deserves this kind of quiet, careful attention. If you have a region, a faction, a mystery, or a story from the lore that you would like to see covered, leave it in the comments below. Every suggestion is read, and many of them end up becoming exactly this. Thank you for spending this time in the dark with me. Until next time, keep the Astronomicon in sight. You may need it.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.